So, before we begin in earnest, I just want to take a moment to explain why the audio on my end might be not up to the usual standard. It is the Christmas season. I am home for the holidays and do not have access to all my usual equipment and my usual space. So if there's some pops, some glitches, some whatever's here and there, I did my best, but sorry.
Standing on that ledge, you think you're gonna fly. If you take that long last step, we'll have to say goodbye. Whoa, whoa.
Hello and welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse, where we tell you who lived, who died, and who deserved to die. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And this week, we're on the cutting edge with Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Jackson, what did you think of this movie?
So this movie reminded me of everything that I like about Star Wars. It reminded me of why I'm a Star Wars fan. And that sounds like it's a good thing. And being in the theater, the experience of watching the movie, it was. I really, really liked it. I'd go so far as to say while I was watching it, I loved it. And it made me feel like I was a child watching Revenge of the Sith again. And that sounds like damning with faint praise, but when I was like 10 years old, Revenge of the Sith was my favorite movie. I saw it like 20 times in theaters. It's what made me a big Star Wars fan. So for good and ill, though, it reminds me of what I like about Star Wars, because then when I sat down, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that a lot of the elements about this that were good, a lot of the themes, a lot of the characters that I liked, it wasn't as big of a departure as people are saying, because that's sort of the discourse around this movie right now, is that it's very divided, and it seems like half think that it's good because it's different, the other half think that it's bad because it didn't answer the questions that they wanted answered. It wasn't what they were expecting. And so it's weird being in a position where, I initially very much enjoyed it for what I perceived as like something new, but then sort of thinking about it again, I feel a little bamboozled, kind of like an idiot, because when I went and thought about it one more time, I was like, well, like, thematically, it's not really saying anything that Empire and Return of the Jedi didn't already. And that, I don't know. So I'm left in I got complicated feelings on this one. I sort of wish I had the opportunity to watch it again. I only saw it the one time, and it's gonna get a second rewatch. You can look over on my Twitter and you'll see like my fresh, like, in my theater seat reaction was like, oh my god, like, I haven't had such a like fun experience watching a movie in ages. I haven't legitimately enjoyed a movie like this in a long time. And then slowly, like, throughout the course of like a day, maybe a day or two, it just sort of, a lot of the small things that I sort of pushed out of my mind in the theater just because I was sort of like caught up in the game of like expectations, because by the time I saw it, I had already seen that there was a backlash. Like, I went in kind of worried, which maybe made me think more positively of it, because it wasn't like, because I've seen people say that it's worse than the prequels, and that is just absolutely ridiculous. As an individual film, I think it's great. It's well constructed. There's a little bit of, there's a decent amount of flab. It could stand to be trimmed down, but overall, it's way more well structured and more well written than Force Awakens was. And so just on the craft level, I think it was very good. But then when you get into the meaning of Star Wars and its place and like the canon, and that's when I think you realize it's maybe not doing as many interesting things as it first appeared.
I left the theater more tempered in general. I was as I was watching it, didn't necessarily think it was a bad movie. I think it was fine. And to Jackson's point, as a standalone film, it probably would have been very, very solid. Like, there was nothing necessarily wrong with it. It kept its pace relatively well. There, as he said, there was some flab that definitely could have been trimmed, but I think it worked for what it wanted to do, and it was a relatively enjoyable film. Out of context of Star Wars. When you put the context of Star Wars back into it, I think it became clear that it followed the Lucas school of poetry, it rhymes, in that there were a lot of scenes that were reminiscent of just the greatest hits of the original trilogy. We get references to A New Hope in a lot of ways. We get a lot of Empire Strikes Back in a lot of ways. There's just a lot of continuous showings from previous movies within this one. And it's not necessarily in clear ways. In some cases, it's very clear that it was an homage to A New Hope or what have you. In other cases, it's a little bit more subtle. Either way, if you are attuned to the Star Wars universe, you'll definitely pick up on it. And for some, that's going to be, not a problem. There's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with having references or callbacks or shot designs that are, clearly supposed to allude to another movie, but in this case it just feels like it's overdone. And that's coming from someone who will defend The Force Awakens to my death. I thought that movie, while as a standalone kind of sucked and would be considered worse than The Last Jedi as a standalone movie, within the context of the Star Wars universe works better for being poetry and rhyming with the original New Hope in a lot of ways. I think that it played off the idea that there are multiple generations now watching Star Wars, so let's make it familiar to the older generations and cool for the new generations, as well as mainly introducing new and interesting characters, which I think The Force Awakens did very well. I don't think The Last Jedi really did anything too interesting with its characters, and I know this is a lot of where Jackson and I differ, in that I would honestly put The Force Awakens as a better movie in context of Star Wars, just not in the context of standalone movies.
Yeah, let's mention Force Awakens then really quickly, because I think it's Star Wars. Everyone's gonna have a different take about where they're coming from. So Force Awakens, I thought it was all right. I left the theater. It was pretty much exactly what I expected it to be. I left the theater with a pleasant feeling. I didn't think it was great. I liked some of the characters. I liked some of the performances. I thought it was all right. I feel like now, though, for me, watching this movie, watching Last Jedi has only made my feelings on Force Awakens worse, because a lot of what I think this movie does wrong or is sort of limiting about this movie are holdovers from Force Awakens, the way that it set up the post-Return of the Jedi world. Without going into spoilers for the new one, the fact that we're still in the dichotomy of the Empire versus the Rebels, even though that doesn't really make any sense, and the movie doesn't go out of its way to make it make sense, and even if it did make sense, just feels sort of tired and disappointing that that's the best they could come up with the Star Wars universe. I left that sort of thinking about the First Order Resistance conflict, and that has only strengthened here because of how limited it feels. And I felt this way when Force Awakens came out. Say what you will about the prequels, but incompetent of films as they may be, they were trying something different. They were trying to be this Greek tragedy in the Star Wars universe of a flawed character, brought down by his own hubris and this descent. I don't think the prequels made very good on those ideas. They mostly failed in almost every single way.
Hey, they brought us Jar Jar, and I think he's really the most advanced character that we've ever seen out of a Star Wars movie. So I would watch your tongue a little bit.
Well, he is a funnier character that we're used to having. Anyway, I am pro George Lucas. I am pro the man had a vision, flawed as it was, unable, as much as he was unable to make good on that vision. I think the prequels, in a lot of ways, at least like Revenge of the Sith, and mostly Revenge of the Sith, because Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, in addition to all their other problems, were a little too bogged down in the Star Wars structures. There was, the Clones especially had a lot of like fan service that Phantom Menace didn't have, and then Phantom Menace had a similar Death Star plot with that stupid robot spaceship. But we're not here to talk about the prequels. Point being,
remember though, if you are looking to, given that he is defending the prequels, you can reach him at Jackson J. Keller on Twitter.
well, hold on, let me finish before everyone like jumps down my throat. I'm not saying the prequels are better movies than the new ones.
He's an apologist. Get him.
What I am saying is that I think there's a dichotomy. I think that the prequels were the more creative films. They were the more thematically interesting, the more unique films, executed very badly. Whereas 3 times now, with Force Awakens, with Rogue One, and with Last Jedi, we have, the best visuals that money can buy. We have talented actors, doing a good job. We have, like, scripts that have been like workshopped to death and include like levity and humor and like blah 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 blah. But there's no substance there, and that's just sort of how I feel. It's just sort of how I feel about all 3 of these movies. And to its credit, I think Last Jedi, least of all. Rogue One was a total mess. Force Awakens, I think, played it a little too safe. And Last Jedi is an improvement in some ways, but in other ways doubles down on the problems with this new era of Star Wars.
I think that this is going to be one of those debates where it's really going to be dependent on your opinion on what you want to see out of your Star Wars movie. I don't think that there will ever really be a correct answer. I know that there are prequel apologists, and, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily wrong in their views. Like, enjoy a movie. It's a Star Wars movie. It's designed to be fun, and if you get enjoyment out of it, more power to you. So, basically what I'm saying here is that we both have these opinions, and don't get mad at us for them. Your opinions are just as valid, I promise.
And I suppose if we are talking about prequel apologists, yes, I would probably rate Revenge of the Sith higher than Force Awakens. Like, throw that one on the table. Like, there it is. So
once again, Jackson J. Keller on Twitter. Yeah. So, with that, though, I think we are going to start diving into our spoilers. We will probably, as per usual, start off in the beginning and move, deeper as we go on. So if you want to hear our first couple spoilers, stick around. Otherwise, come back later. With that, let us talk about the first spoiler, and more so the first death, non-death, that I think really matters. There's a couple of small deaths of troopers and rebels and whatnot who kind of shape the beginning of the movie and do have some influence on the plot, but I don't necessarily think they are that interesting to discuss.
No, I think Rose's sister is the one that stands out the most. It's a little interesting how we spend a lot of time with this girl and the bomber. And that first space battle I thought was like one of the better space battles in Star Wars in terms of like visuals. Like Poe was doing a lot of fancy flying, and it sticks out in my memory a little bit more than a lot of the than any of the stuff in like that stupid trench run at the end of Force Awakens or the dumb Phantom Menace planet. But I think it is a little interesting how we spend so much time on this character who ends up being a nobody relative to only another character who's going to be important later. But so I think it works. It works pretty well in that regard, and I think it makes some of the Mook deaths have a decent amount of impact to really sell that feeling of like this could be the end of the rebels. They're on the run. But I mean, that's pretty much all I have to say about it.
Yeah, as I said, it does kind of some nice scene setting, but I don't think it really plays too much into like the thematic tones or anything along those regards. So we're just going to kind of skate on by it to, as I said, the first death/non-death, which is Princess Leia, or General Leia. What is she now? It doesn't matter.
General Leia. General Organa. Yeah, I think that's her official title.
We'll go with General Organa. In a cruiser that is being focused down by the First Order, and Kylo Ren, her son, comes up with two TIE bombers and are essentially going to blast the cockpit of the shuttle that she is in, which will, jettison her into space and presumably kill her. And this is, supposed to be a very emotional setup. His mother is his tie to Darth Vader and his, mother. So it has a little bit of an impact, or it's supposed to. So he hesitates to pull the trigger, and instead the bombers he's with end up doing so, and to his belief, killing her, even though it's never touched on again. And I think that's one of the biggest faults of this scene. And there's a big fault coming immediately after that, which is after that whole bombing explosion, she awakens to the Force again, or she awakens in space and uses the Force to fly like Superman back to the ship where she is let in by her crewmates. Which, I see what they were going for here, and I don't want to knock the idea of the scene too much, but the execution was pretty piss poor.
Part of me really likes this idea that for the first time in forever, that we are going to see Leia, tap into the Force in some way. This idea of, again, her being Anakin Skywalker's daughter, and sensitive to the Force, and presumably just as much of a prodigy as Luke. The first time we're going to get to see her just do something cool with the Force, despite not being a Jedi. I'm totally about that. Never mind that it completely contradicts, the themes of this movie of trying to, get away from the importance of bloodlines, of getting away from the Skywalkers, but whatever. Carrie Fisher, more than ever, it's important that Carrie Fisher has something cool and memorable to do. I think just the main problem, I don't even know if it's the flying part. I think it's the fact that we see this, really out there feat, even compared to the prequels, where, everyone's flipping around and, tossing, ships around with the Force, like they're pebbles. Even compared to that, surviving in the vacuum of space and flying seems like a step up. And I can buy that, but the fact that nobody really reacts to it and it just goes unsaid, and nobody really cares, aside from the fact that, oh, wow, she's alive. There isn't the proper amount of awe isn't given to the moment. And not only that, but, yes, it is kind of silly that she flies like Superman in space, and if you wanted to have her have a big, Force moment, you probably could have found a better one.
Yeah, for sure. I was kind of aghast at the way this scene was handled, honestly. I in retrospect, as I was talking to Jackson before we started recording, he pointed out that it was kind of cool to see her, the son of Darth Vader, use the Force. But it was just done in such a way that felt so cheap and weird, and it was just all of a sudden they had this Force power that had never been explained before. And I don't need, an illustrious backstory of every time someone has used the Force in every specific way, but for suddenly someone to fly and it to just never be touched on again feels like a sudden change in the Force. And I don't know, it just feels so out of place for this movie in a lot of ways too, especially because it tries to be a darker, more dour movie, and for her to just straight up Christopher Reeves it is bizarre.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird choice. The tone. I was thinking a lot about the tone because another thing that people don't like about this movie is the jokes. There's a lot of jokes, and I'm kind of two minds about it, just because I think Star Wars has kind of always had a problem with tone. On one hand, it wants to be like a silly, goofy adventure, and on the other hand, it wants to be like a weighty, serious, like space opera. Like the prequels are the worst about this. You have like all the like drama and angst versus like Jar Jar rolling around, but it's always been a weird thing to one extent or another.
The whole problem of jokes is resolved simply by the understanding that this is, or at least it was, supposed to be a series for literal children.
Yeah.
Like, this was not meant to be some adult major thematic movie. Like, you know, the originals had some themes, but they were mainly about like friendship and hope and good things, and interspersed with some jokes and light humor for the children. So I think, and I'm going to quote my dad here because I think he puts this in a very good way, in that Star Wars fans wanted the movies to grow up with them. And that is never what Star Wars has been about. It's always been much more focused on children. That's why Jar Jar existed in the originals. And the tone problem exists very much in those, because they are still trying to be a dramatic Grecian space opera, but it still wants to be for children. And that's what it was first and foremost. So for jokes to exist within this movie, it makes sense. But once again, it's trying to do more. Like, it is trying to both grow up and stay a child at the same time. And I think that's where the tone problem really comes in.
Yeah, and as far as the tone, the movie felt a little toothless in some ways, and that sounds weird because a lot of people die in this movie. But it feels like, as far as the heroes go, I think like there are some surprises with some deaths, but overall, I'm thinking mainly, and I'm gonna jump way to the end here, just because I think it's sort of an emblematic moment. So Finn gets the short end of the stick in this movie for a lot of reasons. It feels like his arc is just treading water. Like, he's still the same kind of like cowardly lion who still wants to do good and has to learn to become part of something bigger. Like, that was his arc in The Force Awakens, and that's fine. In fact, Finn was my favorite part of Force Awakens. I think he was the character with the clearest arc. John Boyega is great. So yeah, Finn is lovely in The Force Awakens. But in this movie, he gets kind of saddled with this side plot where he goes to this stupid casino planet. It's pretty infamous already, so I'm not going to waste too much time. There's a reason it exists, even though it doesn't further the immediate plot. There's some thematic purpose to it, but we didn't need to be there that long, and the whole sequence, I think, it was the one part of the movie I would say that is like not well executed. Whole thing is just tiresome. So moving on from the casino planet, like, Finn learns some lessons on the casino planet, and his big hero moment at the end is charging this laser. He can like kamikaze this laser that's going to like break down the door and like get all the rebels killed. Like, he's gonna sacrifice himself. And even though it's not like a new thing, it's not a really unique arc, I think that works for his character. That's like a logical end place. I think that it would have been a good death for Finn, except he gets saved at the last minute by Rose, and then they just sort of walk away. And it feels very toothless. Like, you know, Finn, again, is like a beloved new character. So, you know, having him sacrifice himself could have meant a lot. But instead, he just doesn't. the only heroes that are allowed to die are the ones that, let's be honest, like we expected to die, like walking into the theater, like Luke, or new characters like the Admiral, Vice Admiral, purple hair, and just some of the other side characters. So no one important really dies on the hero side. And I don't know, when you're trying to sell this dark tone, especially, and I'm not saying that like just because it's dark means that someone has to die. I mean, no one died in Empire, and I thought that was fine. I wouldn't say that someone needed to die in Empire, even though it's a darker movie. But the fact that they set up that arc and had that fake out felt really cheap. It felt against the spirit of the movie and like the arc of the character. And worse yet, now Finn gets to just kind of hang around. He already was like spinning his wheels on the same arc for a second time, and I don't really. In the last movie, I was sort of excited to see where his story was going to go, and now I am not.
I came to the realization that Finn and Rose, the girl he just spends the entire episode with inexplicably, kind of remind me of droids. Like, they kind of are like the new C-3PO R2-D2, and that they just kind of go off and have their own adventure that has some light bearing on the plot, but kind of are more just doing their own thing, and in a lot of ways kind of comic relief, kind of heart in a weird way, but never really super important. And so for one of them to get this moment where they had the opportunity to do something incredibly important, something incredibly heroic and cool, for them to just be like, nah, you're gonna live. I was kind of angry in the theater that this had just happened. I was really disappointed because this felt like it would have been a very good moment. And yeah, you would have required killing off a character who is doing gangbusters as far as how he's being perceived, but I think that would have kind of solidified him as a legend within the Star Wars mythos. Like, Yoda dies at the end of the second one. Spoilers, I guess. But he's a beloved character nonetheless. He was brought back for the prequels, and in this movie as well, he shows up. And he died a legend, as John Boyega's character could have very easily done here.
Well, because the movie's very wishy-washy on whether it wants to like prop up new legends, because that's the only little wrinkle to Finn's arc, is that his exploits in The Force Awakens, standing up to Kylo Ren and like helping out, or like stories have been told about him, and the movie, at least in part, wants to kind of tear down these legends, tear down these heroes. That's the whole point of Poe's story. But there's a real contradictory impulse. There's a real contradictory impulse there, because then you get the Vice Admiral, who's got a big hero moment. You get Luke, who has a big hero moment. You
get Disney, who has Big Hero 6.
Fuck you. Anyways, and this is one of the cruxes of the meta problem with this movie, is that it wants to be about taking down heroes, taking down icons, and being a Star Wars movie for the people. That's the point of having the casino planet. That's the point of having the kid use the Force on the broom at the end. It wants to divorce heroism from this idea of the bloodline. And that's what a lot of people are praising this movie about, that it gets away from the Skywalkers, and that it gets it's more for everyone, which okay. So I got a lot of feelings about this, because I think that when people talk about the chosen one bullshit, I think it's been a little bit since I've seen the original, so I could be wrong, but that is mostly a product of the prequels, because Luke, yes, Luke's father is Darth Vader. And yes, like there is some like coincidences with like familial relations with like the Force or whatever. There's like some of that in the original trilogy, especially towards the end. But really, Luke started as a farm boy in nowhere. He was just a nobody. Han Solo is like a smuggler, helps destroy the Death Star, also kind of a nobody. Like Leia is royalty. That element ends up getting pretty downplayed when her kingdom blows up. And when you have like the bloodline element in the originals, it's presented as a bad thing. The great legacy that Luke and Leia are inheriting is Darth Vader, like a genocidal, basically robo SS officer. Really, I think that like this kind of hero worship started in the prequels, where Anakin has like a literal virgin birth. Anakin is literally space Jesus, except even then, like, it's presented as a bad thing because the Jedi are all like distant, like creepy monks. They make a lot of mistakes. They don't. They're like emotionally distant, and they create this monster. They create Anakin, and then even in the original trilogy, like Obi-Wan and Yoda want Luke to go and kill Vader. They want him to go kill him. And then Luke, being the member of the younger generation, divorced from like the institutions of the Jedi, divorced from this chosen one prophecy. Luke is the one who goes in, and he doesn't want to kill Vader. He thinks he can still be saved. He thinks he's still got some humanity left. And he's the one who doesn't go along with what Obi-Wan and Yoda are telling him. And Luke, as part of the younger generation, succeeds where, the previous ones had failed. The Emperor is defeated. He's able to redeem Darth Vader. Like, that's what's great about Luke's character arc, is that unintentionally or not, like everything that was shitty about the Jedi and the prequels, and this is like the one way I think the prequels actually enhance the original trilogy. Everything about the Jedi that was shitty in the prequels does not apply to Luke. Luke is like more emotional. Luke is like more like warm and friendly, and like he's a new kind of Jedi. Great story. The original trilogy is great. So what do we have going on in Last Jedi? We have Luke Skywalker, who is a fallen legend. He's drinking like milk out of a sloth titty, and he's a creepy old man on an island, and he messed up because he tried to kill Kylo Ren, and that created the Kylo Ren problem. So then we have, an older generation making a mistake, and then a new generation in Rey coming back and correcting it. Except she doesn't really, because Kylo's still a bad guy. And then Luke comes back and redeems himself in a big display of heroism, even though the movie is arguing that heroism is bad. So, at best, we have a movie that is saying the exact same thing as Return of the Jedi was, as Empire was. That we need to move on from the old and leave them behind. At worst, we have a movie that is saying the same thing and is less coherent about it. God, like, the more I talk about this movie, the less I like it.
Well, I am sorry to have brought you involved on this one then.
I
hate hearing that.
It wouldn't have. I think it was just inevitable, like, just with the discourse around this movie. I think, like, that, like, people are talking about it for a lot of reasons. Star Wars is important to a lot of people, so of course it's going to be under a lot of scrutiny. So, but yeah, I mean, I guess like because that was the one thing about this movie that I really enjoyed was its commitment to theme. But really, like, what is the theme? Giving back to a new generation. Well, that's the same theme. And let heroes die, like legends are a bad thing. Well, the movie contradicts that with the Vice Admiral and Luke and even Yoda's reappearance. Like
Even the ending, like that was the whole point of the ending too, is they talk about Luke as a legend and those kids on the stable on the casino planet.
And Rey is clearly like, sure, she's from nothing, but you know, like it's not that different from Luke being a farm boy on Tatooine. She still has a certain, like, she was still granted like a certain amount of power just by being able to wield the Force like that. So really, even the themes in this movie are completely muddled. And
yeah, that's kind of how I felt about it walking out. It's not necessarily a terrible movie still, but it has some issues. It's kind of messy, is what I can say of it.
No, and because now, like, the clearest theme expressed is being, again, about this, like, power to the people. Anyone, like, the new Jedi will not be this privileged class. Like, they'll come from anywhere. They'll be anyone. You know, that's the whole point of the casino planet, is that, like, the exploitation, this, like, class commentary. Sure, fine, that's all great. Except, you know, I don't know. It feels like, at best, it feels like a rebuking of the prequels. Because it didn't feel like that much of a, like, the whole bloodline thing wasn't that important in the originals. So really, like, we have its importance in the prequels, and now we're getting a rebuke of the prequels. But did we need that? I think the prequels have been pretty thoroughly rebuked.
To say the least, yeah.
I guess I got us a little bit off track on death there, but I think with the...
No, I mean, I think it does relate back in a lot of ways, because a lot of legends are created through their death and their story and whatnot. And I think that if this movie's discussing both celebrating and distancing themselves from legends and from their past, it's important to discuss the fact that a lot of the legends who arise are from their deaths. So the death of, say, Luke, or purple-haired lady who dive bombs the Imperial ship, are both, you know, important things to focus on, because it is very thematically relevant to their death.
Yeah, and I guess, like, especially with Luke, I was really surprised that they played the Jedi Last Stand completely straight. Like, I thought that was going to be the gotcha on there. Like, Luke was still going to be alive, and he wasn't going to adhere. Because, you know, if you think about it, if you're talking about discarding the old way, like, on a meta level, that's the old Jedi way, is to die so a new generation could do better. Obi-Wan did it, Qui-Gon did it, Yoda did it, they all did it. So...
And if you want to talk about an old way, they did the exact same thing in New Hope, so it's just that again.
Yeah, you know, but Han, Force Awakens, I mean, he's not a Jedi, but still. So I thought that, like, with him doing the, like, psychic projection, and with him having this moment where he shows up Kylo and, like, proves himself to be the better man, like, a moment that I liked, that was a very Luke Skywalker thing to do. Like, that was, Luke is, like, one of my favorite characters in all of movies, and I liked a lot of what was going on with him in this movie, with a couple of exceptions. But that ending moment felt like a very Luke Skywalker thing, and the fact that, like, I was like, okay, like, Yoda was telling Luke, like, he has to teach the next generation his failures, like, that makes sense. Like, it makes sense that Luke would walk out of this way alive. But then he just dies anyway. And then it's the exact same thing. And I'm like, well, what was the point of that sequence? Like, in effect, Kylo could have just killed him on the planet, and that would have been no different. Your little, like, twist. Your little bait and switch wasn't really a bait and switch at all.
Yeah, he still, for all intents and purposes, Kylo still killed him. Just in this case, it was through sheer exertion.
Yeah, so I don't know why they did that. Although I guess all right. We've been ragging on this pretty hard. But speaking of Kylo, I will give the movie this. Kylo Ren continues to be an excellent villain. He continues to be the best, most interesting part of these movies.
Oh my god, I love Kylo. I think he's the use of him essentially just being a Darth Vader fanboy and just being like edgy and unsure of himself is awesome. I love it so much. I think he's very interesting in this. His interactions with Rey are fantastic. His just sheer rage against Luke was, over the top but enjoyable. I still really like him. I'm not going to knock him. I think Adam Driver does a really good job of playing him. I think it's a very nuanced character, and he nails it.
And it gets into another thing that I'm glad, and one particularly, one criticism of the movie that I don't agree with is that they kill Snoke so soon, and we never really found out what his deal was. I never gave a shit about Snoke, and the fact that we are now focusing on Kylo instead of having another Palpatine-like big bad. I like that. I like that they have the throne room scene and he gets off and it looks like it's going to be like, Rey and Kylo adventures. But then Kylo still wants to control the First Order. He's still, he's still Kylo Ren. And I thought that was a little moment that was great. And I like the execution of that throne room scene. I like the fight him and Rey had with the bodyguards. That was cool. Yeah, I thought that basically, like, when I was watching the movie, the best parts of it were, like, the Rey, Luke, Kylo plotline. And then it comes to a head in the throne room. I like the twist on the classic Jedi throne room scene. But it seemed like they were setting up that Rey would actually join Kylo. Like, that was actually a possibility. And that was an exciting possibility.
I was so for that. Just, like, trashing both the Jedi and the Sith and just creating, like, a one single unified order. Like, I was fully expecting by the end of this movie for there to be not Jedi and Sith, but, like, Sedai or Jith or something like that. Something dumb. Probably not those terms because those are some of the worst things I've ever said in my life. But something new and interesting to develop from this First Order business happening. Like, I was expecting this to go on since the first time that Rey and Kylo had the link together. Like, I was like, all right, I am very interested in this. And, that whole scene I thought was going to lead to something interesting and set up a very interesting plot for the third movie. But instead, and I'm going to really quick comment on why I think the Snoke death kind of sucked, is A, I was in a packed theater and everyone applauded, and I hate it when people applaud movies. But B, the whole point of Snoke was to kind of have something to, someone mysterious, someone to follow. It was literally an Abrams mystery box, which, yes, are total bullshit. I'm well aware of that. But it was something that at least carried from movie to movie. And now with Snoke dead after being just a nobody, and basically every other loose end aside from the fact that they're still out there tied up, I don't really care about what they're going to offer in the next movie. Like, we basically went from here's 30 mystery boxes to here's none. And I think that some sort of interesting hook to bring me back to the next movie would have been really nice to have, and maybe that would just be don't kill Snoke and let him escape in some mysterious way. Maybe not. The problem now is that because this movie was so Star Wars and there was no mystery to bring me back to the next one, I already feel like I know what's going to happen. They're not going to spring any new cool tricks on me. It's going to be Star Wars again, and that's my biggest fear.
Well, here's a counterpoint to that. The ending of A New Hope left little to no loose ends. It left Darth Vader. Who at the time was not really was not really like the iconic, like well-developed character that he was. Like Empire did a lot of the legwork into making Vader a truly great villain. So
It left with the question of how Luke is going to reconcile with the fact that Darth Vader just revealed he was his
no,
father.
that's Empire.
Right, that's what I'm did I say A New Hope?
I'm talking about A New Hope. A New Hope didn't leave anything. It was a standalone movie. It left Vader spinning off into space. And
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And from it, they created Empire, like the greatest movie sequel of all time. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem, especially because I was not that interested in like whether Snoke was like Palpatine clone, like solid Palpatine or whatever, solid Sidious. And I think getting rid of the Emperor figure, I think even though on the surface it seems like cutting off a lot of the branches, I think the fact that now we have Kylo in charge, and that's a lot more of a
interesting character.
I mean, it's more of an interesting character, and also since he's kind of a buffoon, it's more of an interesting situation of like maybe there will be some like mutinies, the First Order will start to break down internally. There's some possibilities with that, but more to the point, one thing I really did appreciate for this movie, especially since at the time Colin Trevorrow was set to direct Star Wars Episode 9. I mean, I'm a little more hopeful now that Abrams is on board again. He's certainly a much better director, but I do appreciate that this movie designed itself so it could be enjoyed as a standalone movie. And I think it's rather telling that when I see the reactions, it seems like the less of a Star Wars fan you are, the more enjoyable this movie was to you, which makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. But I think that I really appreciate it. I really appreciate that this movie wanted to have like a conclusion. It had a theme, and in retrospect, it didn't make perfectly good on that theme. But it tried to lead up to arcs and climaxes, and it didn't leave a lot of bullshit for sequels, which I think is something that we've been conditioned to expect as a theater going audience, that we need to have these questions in order for the sequel to be interesting. But you can make a good sequel with no loose ends. In fact, the fewer loose ends you have, the more room you have to maybe try something new. So I don't think the fact that we're offing Snoke so soon, I see it as because like if we have Snoke around and he's just another Palpatine, which is even in Force Awakens is what he seemed to be built up to be, like where is that going to lead us? Going to lead us to another throne room scene. And the fact that we dealt with that in the middle of this movie, I think was like one of the best calls that they made.
No, you're right, honestly. I think as you were kind of getting into it, I think you raised some very cogent points about that. And I think that there is an element of, you just want something there. But, a lot of movies, sequels have been made without having those questions. And it might just be, because like I've been thinking about it, like it used to be that the second movie was almost always better than the first, especially in trilogies. Like, for whatever reason, the second Indiana Jones, Star Wars, etc. was really, really good. I've been feeling more with recent trilogies that the second movie tends to be the worst, and I can't help but wonder if maybe I'm missing that. It used to be that the second movie was going to be a blessing if it happened, and so we're going to have the world built by that point, but not necessarily have the ideas in place for it yet, as opposed to what we have now, which does tend to be a little bit more of Abrams' mystery box, where they introduce, here's a question, what's going to happen? Because you really pigeonhole yourself with that, and you are basically saying that I need to answer this question or I need to resolve it in a certain way.
Yeah, and I think in addition to the mystery box, it's also just another element of this focus on, making the universe, the cinematic universe or whatever. You could pull any sort of example out of that, like, oh, don't worry, we'll leave it for the sequel. We're going to deal with the consequences of this in the sequel. But, that's the miracle of the original Star Wars. they didn't expect it to get a sequel. Like, certainly it's possible that George Lucas wanted to do like this whole saga in his head, but in terms of practicalities, like, it was projected to fail. The studio wasn't behind it, so all they had of one movie, and they made a really good movie that changed the face of entertainment. And from then on, they were able to go on and make more movies. So I appreciate that, especially for a Star Wars movie to do this, that to try and focus on like being a satisfying film in its own right. Whether or not it succeeded, I have more doubt than ever on that. I legitimately like feel like I want to go to the theater and like give it a full like reevaluation on the second watch. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but yeah, that is the one thing I really did appreciate about it.
I'll have to bring my significant other. I think she's like one of the few people in the world who has not seen Star Wars. Like, she's seen The Force Awakens at this point because I made her watch it with me, but she has not seen any of the original trilogy or anything like that. So I'd be really curious to see what she feels of this movie as someone who is not inducted into the Star Wars mythos.
Yeah, it's a good experiment, because I know that, because my significant other had seen the Star Wars movies, but she'd only seen them like once. She wasn't like a Star Wars fan, and like she told me like this was way more enjoyable than she was expecting. So I don't know. It's an interesting thought that it works better as a standalone movie as opposed to being part of the mythos.
Yeah, for sure. I think I think that's something that's worth looking into and maybe kind of running some experiments with those who are less well versed in the verse of Star Wars. That was a really dumb joke. Cut that. Just cut that. So let's we're gonna wrap it up as we usually do with a little bit of the heavier questions. Because, we can't leave you guys on a happier note. Any sort of jokes or anything like that? No, please, come on.
This is beating a dead horse we're talking about here. This isn't a podcast about life.
We like to make you a little upset on your way out the door. So we're going to kind of just touch on Carrie Fisher and her untimely and incredibly unfortunate passing last year, and kind of discuss how we think the Star Wars series is going to rectify this real-life death. Because she's left as a very big hero within this movie. Like, she's not treated as someone who's getting just kind of written out for the next movie. Like, they clearly feels like they had plans for her. She lives, no problem. There are no injuries. There's nothing wrong with her. She just kind of walks away onto the Millennium Falcon at the end of it, no worse for wear, and arguably in a better place than she was when the movie started. So I'm very curious to see how they're going to handle this incredibly influential individual who has unfortunately passed away in the real world.
So there's definitely a certain melancholy to the fact that all three of the original like trio are now gone, whether that's for real world reasons or for, reasons in the fiction.
God, you just gave me a heart attack. I thought Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford died recently. I'm like, what did I miss?
No. I mean Luke, Han, and Leia, not Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill. Anyway, in the text, we don't have Han and Luke. I mean, let's be real. We probably will see Luke again, especially now that we don't have Leia. He's probably going to be Yoda-ing. He's probably going to be a Force ghost. So
there have already been rumors of Han returning as well, actually.
Oh no, don't do that. Anyway, but with Carrie Fisher, I understand why they didn't change the film at all to account for this, because I understand that you want to be respectful to her final performance. I feel like you could have recut it. You could have found a way to make it so Leia is the one that gets the light speed death charge. The best scene in the movie, we're deep into spoiler territory, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Vice Admiral Purplehair's big hero moment, the visually stunning moment where she goes light speed and just obliterates the Dreadnought. It's awesome.
It's absolutely incredible. It's like this is the one scene in Star Wars where it's actually silent in space, and it pays off in such a beautiful, beautiful way if you don't have assholes clapping in your theater at it. I'm I'm very upset about my theater going experience in case that's not obvious.
No, my theater was very good about it. They were all just like they had the proper reaction of like stunned, like silence, like the heaviness of the moment. I think I actually put my hand over my mouth. It would have taken some doing, would have taken some modification, but I feel like you could have made it so that Leia was the one making that charge, and that would have been an
incredible send-off.
A perfect send-off to her character. And on the one hand, I do understand that it might feel gauche to kill off her character after, like, the actress herself has just passed, but I feel like it solves a story problem. Not that that's the most important thing, but also I feel like having her get like the moment in the movie, the biggest moment in the movie, it would be a far better send-off than like saying Leia died on her way back to her home planet in like the title crawl of the next movie.
Plus, Carrie Fisher is pretty much a huge badass. Like, she's just an awesome person in general. I feel like she probably would have preferred to go out in that way. Like, as far as her character went, I would be willing to put money on Carrie Fisher being like, yeah, no, fuck, that is badass as shit, we're doing that. Launch me at a ship at light speed. That's incredible.
It's a much better death than Han got, that's for sure. And, there is the possibility that they're going to have her still be alive, but just not around, which, I mean, I feel like they shouldn't kill her off screen. I feel like that's the wrong move.
Oh, that's so tasteless.
Yeah, it's gonna be... Oh my god, you know what? I mean, there is no good answer, because I'm just thinking about now, I don't know if you felt this way, but remember back when, The Dark Knight Rises came out, and everyone was wondering what they were gonna do about Heath Ledger, and then they just sort of never mentioned the Joker, they never said his name, even, and it felt weird. It felt weird that, the most important character in the last movie didn't have any impact on the world at all. So I'm wondering...
In defense of that, really quick, just before we slide in, I would say that the one thing that I didn't really feel that awkwardness about that, just because it kind of felt like a Batman villain of the week type of thing to me. So, like, to me, I'm like, all right, just swept it under the rug and moved on, as Batman comic books did. That's my 2 cents. Continue. I apologize.
No, you're good. Yeah, I mean, we won't get into The Dark Knight Rises here, but I'm worried they'll do that they just won't mention her.
And see, kind of to what I was just saying, though, if they don't do that in Star Wars, it's going to feel a lot more out of place, because she has been such an important character for 6 movies at that point. So it wouldn't have been like a Batman villain of the week where they could sweep aside the Joker because comics, after he's beaten, he's in Arkham or something like that. In this case, she just would be gone, which would be, like a void. There would actually be almost a void in her place.
I feel like the best we can hope for is that, like, she's just like mission control, but we never hear her voice. Like, in the canon, like, she sends Poe or Rey or whoever, like, onto the mission that becomes the plot of Episode 9, and then, like, they mention her every once in a while, like, she's still leading the Resistance, but she's got, like, other things to do. She's, like, the leader, so she's not down doing the grunt work anymore.
Kind of like an in media res type of thing, where, like, all right, we're on this mission from General Organa, and go from there.
Yeah, I certainly, I mean, they've said they're not going to CGI her, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's confirmed that they're not planning on it. Fingers crossed that they stick to that.
I was gonna say, that would be actually the worst plan. That would be the worst option.
Okay, yeah, that is fair. I don't need another Grand Moff Tarkin or young Carrie Fisher, because that both of those were awful in Rogue One.
And even Tarkin, I thought, like, I feel like we crossed a line that, like, we can't go back from now. Like, we like CGI dug up like Peter Cushing like that, and I'm like, that's wrong. This is morally wrong.
Yeah, we just don't CGI dead actors and actresses into your movies. That's weird. Then with that important lesson, and yes, that is important. Don't CGI dead actors into your movies.
Naughty studios.
So we're gonna wrap up here. As always, I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. I'm also streaming on Twitch every Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday at twitch.tv/helplessskippy.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me over on Twitter at JacksonJKeller, where I will be slowly wrestling with my complicated feelings for Star Wars and eventually come to the conclusion that Phantom Menace is, in fact, the greatest film of all time.
Once again, that is Jackson J. Keller on Twitter, please. I had nothing to do with his opinions, so, don't come after me. If you would like to follow the podcast, once again, not associated with Jackson J. Keller's opinions, you can do so at BADH_cast on Twitter. We tweet about things that we got coming up, clips from recent shows, and other just kind of fun stuff. As always, we'd like to thank Lords of the Highway as well for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. Additionally, we are now on YouTube. Going onto YouTube and searching for creator of Beating a Dead Horse, you should find our channel. We're not really super SEO'd at this point, so it might take some digging to actually find us, but we're there, we promise. I'll put a link in the description below. Next Thursday, we'll be talking about the new Jumanji movie. Until then, instead of a closing joke, I would encourage you to go out and donate to one of the charities that Carrie Fisher was a proud supporter of. She has had a massive impact on a lot of lives and was an incredible person, and I think needs to be honored in the best way possible. So please, go donate to like the Alzheimer's Association and stuff. It helps out a lot of people. Thank you.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go